Brian Friedman, how you doing?
Hey, I'm good. Good to be here, Ben.
I'm so excited. I got somebody from across the pond coming to me live right now. This is fantastic.
I'm waving to you from many time zones away.
So where in the world are you right now?
I'm in London, in England.
Okay, London, England. I've never been. I hear the weather is gorgeous.
It's rubbish at the moment. Absolute rubbish.
Very similar to Detroit, probably. That's great. Now, are you a Londoner your whole life?
I am. I'm born and bred. For someone who's worked in mobility for many, many years, my dirty little secret is I haven't worked abroad enough. I've traveled all over the world, visited clients and companies all over the world, but I haven't done enough assignments.
My job as an interviewer is complete when I get a dirty little secret in under 1 minute. So I appreciate it. I do. So I got a question for you, just personal question. I aspire to travel abroad. I've not really. And I've moved all over the U.S. and I've traveled all over the U.S. And a little bit to Canada and some of the Caribbean, but I've never traveled abroad. I want to do it for work, preferably, right? What advice do you have for me as I'm trying to launch my international business career?
Oh, just do it. I mean, I don't know if it was fortunate or whatever, but I started a conference business, the Forum for Expatriate Management.
Right.
And the great thing about that was we put on conferences all over the world. So we did them in Australia, in Hong Kong, in Singapore, all over the US, around Europe, in the UK. So there I was. I had the perfect opportunity to go and take my team, travel around the world, meet nice people, and get paid for doing it.
And did you you got to tell me about this, right? Because so I have to admit, I've never been to a FEM conference, but I've heard really fantastic things about it. How did you start that? Why did you start that? Can you just give me some idea about that?
Yeah, well, the original idea came from, I was a senior partner at one of the big accounting firms, EY, and I realized I was selling something, which in my case was I was selling tax and immigration advice. And I actually realized one day that I was looking at it through the wrong end of the telescope. It wasn't what am I selling, which in my case was tax or immigration, but somebody else might be saying they're selling relo services or moving services or housing services. It's not a question of what am I selling, it's a question of what is the client buying. Look at it from their end of the telescope. Then I started to think, well, actually, how big is this industry? If you look at it from the client's perspective of everything they buy, from international schools to wealth management to healthcare to everything to do with mobile employees.
Right.
And it struck me that this was whatever, I mean, a $150 billion industry in its widest sense.
Mm-hmm.
No one's really pulling it together. No one's actually having events around the world that brings people together. And I thought, well, that's not a bad thing to do.
Yeah.
So I got my address book out. I started putting on one or two small events, and we started in London. And within 6 weeks, we were also going live originally in New York, then in Dallas, and it just went from location to location. And
tell me about that first event that you did in London. How many people was it? I mean, it must have been small. What was it like?
About 100 came along to the first event.
Wow. Okay.
And it was very kindly hosted by KPMG. And they said, we will give you a room. We will put together the drinks and the canapes. You invite the people, and let's see where it goes. And I suppose they liked it because, they had people maybe they didn't know coming along, and it wasn't them effectively trying to sell their tax services. It was actually, we had a client come along and talk about, in that very first event, it was a client coming along and talking about global employment companies.
Mm-hmm. And then what made you think that, hey, this thing in London at KPMG's office could turn into a global association for mobility?
I'm not sure I did when it first started. I mean, it was an idea of something to do. And then I met people. I met a guy from New York, a guy called Michael Cadden from Living Abroad, who's still running the New York chapter, 11, 12 years later. And I met him early on, and he said, well, why don't I do something similar with KPMG in New York? And then I met somebody from Dallas who said the same. And it just grew. I mean, the lesson I've learned in terms of starting a business is once you start, you don't really know where it's going to go, but it will go somewhere, and you just have to follow. Just take a chance.
And I think that's true too, right? So a lot of times I think, and by the way, if you're watching this right now, I want to see a comment here. I want to know who you are, where you're located, what the name of your company is. I definitely want to give you a shout out. Anybody that's viewed this before knows how we roll. So just drop one in the comments. Also hit that like and that applause button there for me. I appreciate it. I love the validation. Please pour it on. I really appreciate that. And if you have any questions for Brian, let us know here. We'll answer your questions live as well. But going back to what you were saying about starting a business, I think it's important. And when I talk to entrepreneurs, they always talk about how things have pivoted and how they've changed and evolved and iterated. And I think it's important to not overthink the destination, but just get started on the journey and be open-minded to opportunities as they come along. Did you see, was that kind of part of the evolution of FEM?
Yeah, it was very much, just starting to see how it goes. But after I've been going for a while, I remember somebody once saying to me years before, a business isn't a serious business, unless it can turn over at least $1 million. Mm-hmm. So I sat down one day with a piece of paper and I looked at what I was doing, and it was a long, long way off that. And I said, well, how could this get to $1 million? And I started sort of coming up with ideas of things that we could do. The idea of the awards ceremony came out of that. The idea of doing bigger conferences, of doing research reports, even doing a jobs board for recruitment. Various ideas came out of it. And you tot them all up and you think, is there any way this could hit $1 million? And then it builds up from there. But you need to stretch yourself.
Yeah.
So that's my test. Can you hit $1 million?
I love the award ceremony. I love the awards. I think our industry needs more awards. I think we have probably too many conferences, but we don't have enough awards, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people doing a lot of really good work out there. And I think the awards, I just think people love that stuff. So, how did that work, and how did you come up with that? In the name and just the whole concept of the awards. Just for a moment, if you don't mind talking about that.
Yeah, sure. I'd thought about the awards. Lots of industry sectors obviously do have awards. And I thought it looked, promising. I did bounce the idea off a few people, and they were mainly negative, both in the UK and in the US. I spoke to people.
Why do people love trophies?
I know. It's crazy. And I was talking to one American guy who remained nameless. He said, oh, no, we don't really do award ceremony over here. And I looked at him and said, you guys invented the Oscars, and you're telling me you don't do award ceremonies?
Oscars, Emmys, a million awards.
Yeah, so exactly. So again, I suppose another bit of advice I'd give any budding entrepreneur is don't necessarily listen to advice you get. Go with your gut. The market research isn't always right.
Sometimes I feel like if you have an idea that you love and everybody hates it, that's what you need to go do.
Yeah, what's the worst that can happen? As long as you don't sink your house into it or something.
Right.
That can happen. So in terms of the idea, I knew I wanted to do an awards ceremony, and I was called the Forum for Expatriate Management. So I had, if you like, the EM there from Expatriate Management.
Yeah.
Now, you're going to get two dirty little secrets. I'll give you the next one. My daughter's name is Emma.
Oh.
And so the Emmas sounded like it should be an awards ceremony, because also if you take the Emmys and you take the Oscars and you run those two words together, it sounds like the Emmas. Mm-hmm. I then had to think about, what does it actually stand for? So I then went for the Expatriate Management and Mobility Awards, which sort of reverse engineered in.
Right.
And it's taken off, and people do love it. It's probably the best night out in the mobility industry.
Well, and I love it because I see all the photos, and again, I've never been, and
you got to go. You got to go.
Tell me about it. I need to win something.
The best way to win, to start with, is get yourself nominated. If you're not in it, you're not going to win it.
I like how you reverse engineer things. Yeah. I like this. This is good. But people are in their tuxedos, and it's black tie, and I'm always one that likes to overdress at any occasion. It's a Tuesday morning, and I'm wearing a three-piece suit.
Very smart.
Yeah, but I think that we need to raise the level a little bit, you know. And so anyway, I really enjoyed. Does your daughter get a kick out of the fact it was named after her?
She loves it. My son is less impressed though. he didn't get a shout out.
Oh, that's great. Well,
wouldn't have the same ring.
What was it? What's his name?
The Jonathans wouldn't have the same ring.
The Jonathans. Yeah, we'll workshop that. The Johnny.
On that one, yeah.
Yeah, we'll workshop that a little. Maybe in your new role, you can start.
Absolutely, we'll be doing an award ceremony too.
Let's check out here who checked in with us here. Appreciate everybody checking in here. Still early here in the U.S., but we've got Michael Cadden on. Hi, Brian and Ben. Dan O'Sullivan. Hi, Brian and Ben. Excited for the show. Thanks for being here, Dan. Richard Thurston. I liked how Ben's eyes widened as Brian mentioned the value of the industry. You said 120 billion with a B. I mean that.
Yeah. I reckon. Well, nobody really knows for certain, but you know, it's got to be somewhere between 100 and 200. And frankly, even if it's half of that, it's a big industry.
It's big. They estimate the moving industry in the United States at 12 billion.
Yeah.
So I can only imagine when you globalize that times all these orders of services. Paula Kupka, hi, Ben and Brian. Hey, Paula, always checking in, Paula. I appreciate you. Josh Barnes, good morning from Texas. Anthony Gonzalez, hi, Ben and Brian. Anthony in San Francisco from Shift. Looking forward to the convo. It's only 7 in the morning there in San Francisco. So
morning, guys.
People must really like you, right? John Divot, hi, Brian and Ben. Great interaction. Greetings from Oxford. Oh, very good. We got
the brainy guys.
And Anna Barros Arroyo. Hi, Ben and Brian. Anna from Global Mobility Solutions in Georgia. Hi, Anna. John Zilka, NRI Relocation in Chicago. Wow, we got some good. Lori Murphy. Hi from London. Another Londoner. Check in. So yeah, this is great. This is wonderful. So the way that I became, I was aware of the Emmas and FEM and everything like that. But the way that I became aware of you personally and your new role at Benivo is actually through your newsletter and some of the content that you produce. You do a very nice job keeping us informed. You do a great job putting the newsletter out. Tell me a little bit about I just want to talk for a second about content creation in mobility, because it's something that you and I both kind of specialize in. What's your philosophy around creating content that adds value?
I suppose not trying to sell,
Mm-hmm.
you know, just putting stuff out there that is maybe a little bit of forward thinking, you know, what's going on in the marketplace, what the market's going to be like. I'm a bit of a futurist. I love sort of looking at, you know, where we're going to be in 10, 15, 20 years and doing some provocative stuff there. Some of the stuff that's been going on at the moment regarding mergers and acquisitions in our industry, I think is a very interesting subject.
Yeah.
You know, I also part-time teach at a business school. And so I get quite a lot of sort of academic insights there of stuff that is going on in the world. I think, you know, getting some of that genuine thought leadership out there is important. You're
right about not trying to sell things, because I think as soon as people feel like it's an infomercial, it's like they tune you out, right?
No, exactly.
And we're schooled on detecting that in the first 5 seconds, I think, of meeting somebody. And to be honest, I haven't sold crap since I started doing this. So I think I'm doing a very good job in that regard. But as far as actually creating the content, you talked about just now, mergers and acquisitions, though. Yeah. And the mergers and acquisitions, the M&A space in this industry, I'm curious on what you're seeing on your side of the pond, from a European standpoint.
Well, I think it's probably similar to what you guys are seeing. You know, the relo companies, I think there's quite a lot of pressure going on there. I don't think that's any great secret. And the pressure's coming from all sides. The pressure's coming from the fact that, you know, procurement are getting tougher and tougher and making people sharpen their pencils on the contract bidding. Things are going out to tender more regularly, which again is putting a lot of effort there. We're also seeing technology becoming, you know, you've got to have more and more technology, which is expensive. Moves are changing. You know, people are going to, you know, on much more skinnier moves. We're seeing more lump sums, less traditional assignments. So it's almost like a perfect storm. And And the reality is most industries tend to consolidate down to about 4 or 5 major players over time. So I think, what we're seeing, and, Sir Carter's was a great example of that, but there have been plenty before, of the market consolidating down. And my view on all this is that there's always going to be big players and there's always going to be niche players. The people that have really got the challenge are the guys in the middle. I mean, there's an old saying, go large, go niche, or go bust. And I think that is the challenge for, let's call them middle market relo companies. Right. Which way do they want to go? Do they want to take a niche and say, okay, we are going to be the specialist in this area? Maybe it's a sector, or maybe it's a geography, location, or something. Right. Or do we want to run for cover and team up with somebody else and get those economies of scale and the cover that that a big bank account will provide?
Yeah, I agree with that, because I mean, what's your identity if you're in the muddy middle there? I mean, you're not big enough to compete with the major multinational conglomerate kind of relo companies, and you're not small and nimble enough and personal enough to be the local market provider for services. Yeah, I would agree. But so then in that situation, that scenario, I mean, do they then roll up? I mean, like you see with a Weichert MI group or something, where kind of some ones that are kind of in the middle, they kind of combine forces to create something bigger. Like we saw with Sterling Lexicon, right? I mean, we start to see some, some of that going on. Do you see more of that happening?
Inevitably. I think the other way, as I said, they can go niche and say, we are going to be the leading player in whatever, the tech sector, or the leading player in, this geography, whatever, Japanese outbound, or, they can choose a sector or a geography and really focus in on that.
And can they still get bigger and just go deeper into that? Like say, okay, we're going to just be the tech. We're just going to go after the tech sector. But we're going to own that, and actually it's going to be quite deep, maybe, and actually quite a big business, but it's not going to be complicated. It's going to be focused. Can you still grow and be niche?
Oh yeah. I mean, you can have a large niche player. It depends, of course, on the size of the niche. The thing is, you need your USP. You need some way of differentiating yourself. And I mean, let's look at it from the client's point of view. Again, one of my favorite sayings is, let's look at it from the other end of the telescope. Let's look at it from the client's perspective. You've got somebody who is in procurement in a company, or a head of global mobility in a company, and they're going out to tender because they need to review who they're going to have. They probably don't want to have more than, say, 8 people on their long list, probably even 6 people on their long list when they go out to RFP. And they probably want to shorten that down, maybe when they get to the oral stage, of 3 or 4. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, if you've got, say, 30 or 40 potential people who could do that contract, it's hard for them to get on that shortlist. Now, when you're putting the shortlist together, and let's say you're going to a shortlist of, say, 6, well, you've probably got the incumbent there, so that's one of the spaces gone. You'll probably say, well, I've got to have one of the majors there, so you'll probably say, I'm going to have Cartus or BGRS or somebody like that. So that's that's a couple of spaces gone of the shortlist. You might have somebody where there's a really good relationship, they've done work before, they might hit them. So the reality is, there's not a lot of spaces left for everybody else to fight for.
Right.
But it becomes harder and harder for a company to get on the shortlist. My view has always been, as a provider, is if you don't know about the RFP before it lands on your desk, don't bother even responding.
Right. Because if you weren't a part of the creation and the ideation behind it, you're late to the party, and you're I heard somebody once call it column fodder, where you end up in a column and you're just filling spaces. To your point, they already know what they're going to go with. A couple other people checking in. Jamie Massler, hi, Ben and Brian. Jamie with Corporate Housing Associates from South Haven, Mississippi. Thanks for checking in. Guys, leave your company and your location. Love to hear it. Vinny Valverde, also from the West Coast. It's 7:19 there. Good morning, Ben and Brian. Vinny is in the house. Appreciate you, Vinny. going into some more trends, you've been talking about trends, and I think looking towards the future is really exciting and interesting. And I think you're someone that has their eye towards the future quite a bit. What are some of the trends you're seeing? Or I'm going to throw a couple out there, and just I'd love for you to hear your thoughts on how they might impact mobility. We're seeing a populist movement around the world right now, here in the US, in Britain, in other areas. How is populism going to impact mobility?
Wow. I mean, that's a big one. I mean, I'll tell you my take on it. I think the honest answer is nobody knows. Well, about the future, nobody ever knows anything.
That's too short. That's too short of a podcast. We got it.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's pretend we're experts here.
Exactly. Let me just go into this then. Let me tell you my take on this. Okay. Is I grew up in a world, in fact, we all grew up in a world where globalization was inevitable and was a good thing. You know, there's a world where, you know, globalization has always happened. The world has always globalized. You know, whether you go back to, you know, the founding fathers in America of globalization, the conquistadors in Latin America, sure, however far back you want to go in time, there has been globalization. Even Stone Age man has, you know, globalized, right, moved around. So, and I would argue that that is part of something deep within us, that, you know, as we grow up, we like to explore our environment. I mean,
well, in the US, we called it manifest destiny, right? Where we just felt like it was our destiny to go until the water stopped us. And now you get in boats and now you go around, you know, and all that stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, people say that, you know, when a baby learns to walk, its first steps are away from its parents. You know, they want to explore their environment. I mean, I've said, you know, I know some of the people listening to this podcast have heard the story, but I would say that, you know, I can tell you the name of who the very, very first expats were ever in the world. And it was Adam and Eve in the Bible. You know, Adam leaving the Garden of Eden, the very first story in the Bible. Eve was the first trailing spouse.
Yeah.
So globalization's there. It's been there forever.
So he got deported, didn't he?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Failed assignment, I feel. But you know, but you look at it, and that's in us. And the only thing that's held us back from globalizing more has been technology. That what, you know, technology has helped us globalize. Whether that technology was the wheel or the boat or the ship or the plane or the fax or the telex or the internet, space travel, you know, whatever it is, if we have the technology, we globalize. That is inherent in us. So that is, if you like, megatrend number one, that we globalize. But, and this is the big but, the other trend is we are very proud of where we live. You know, we are natives of a location, and we don't like other people coming in and changing our location. We're house proud or country proud, you know, as citizens. And that's what populism is playing on. So what I've, you know, without wanting to get unduly philosophical about it, is what we're seeing is the old philosopher's paradox of what happens when an irresistible force meets an immovable object. And the irresistible force is globalization, and the immovable object is populism and nativism. And that's what's happening at the moment. You know, so, and we're all stuck in the middle here because, you know, we work for companies that want us to globalize, and we live in countries that actually want to protect our borders. And we're stuck in that.
Who wins? Who wins? Does capitalism and globalism prevail, or does people's fear of change and losing their slice of the pie win? My
guess is that globalism will trump populism at the end of the day. Probably a bad choice of verb, but globalization will beat populism over the long term. But what we're seeing now is definitely a clash of cultures between the irresistible force and the immovable object.
Well, to your point, globalism's been going on for the history of man, whereas populism springs up, comes down, springs up, comes down, right? And so it kind of happens in cycles, right? So the long-term market is on globalization.
The other way of looking at it is, do we live in a world of webs or a world of walls? You know, a web is like a bridge that goes from one place to another, like the World Wide Web or a spider's web, however you want to look at it. Or do we live in a world of walls, like the Berlin Wall, the Mexico Wall, you know?
Great Wall of China.
Yeah, exactly. Which world is it? And the answer is both are going to be there, and it's a conflict between the two.
Well, and you know, the same thing. I mean, look at those walls. Those walls are artifacts now. I mean, they're monuments to a bygone era, right? I mean, you know, people figure out a way to get around walls, you know, over time, right? And so I agree. It's in people's nature. So so the good news is the globalism will prevail, which is really what we're all invested in, really. You know, and I hear so many immigration professionals pulling their hair out because they just cannot get things done. And companies that cannot source the labor that they need and require with the skills that they need in the places they need. And then they just say, well, you know what, if we can't hire them in San Francisco, we're just going to open up an office in Mumbai or somewhere, and we'll get all the labor we need over there. And then they offshore all their record profits, and we have to claw back taxes, and we have no success at doing so.
Exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, if you can't bring the people to the jobs, you'll move the jobs to the people.
Precisely. And we went through this back in the 80s and 90s there in the U.S. with offshoring. We successfully started bringing a lot of it back because there was a lot of money and a lot of growth. And I suspect we might have some problems with it again. But who knows? You know, there's other trends going on, and mega trends in mobility right now. And there's a changing demographic in employees. And I wanted to ask you a question about employee demographics. Are you seeing those change? Because we are over here in the U.S. And how is that going to impact services as they're delivered?
Yeah, I mean, it used to be the case, again, if you go back 50 years, that it was your worst people you sent on assignment. You know, you sent the people on assignment who couldn't cut it in head office.
Well, you always joked about going to Siberia, right? You'd always send them to the gulag out in Siberia.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas now, of course, it's your best people you send on assignment.
That's right.
Completely. I mean, in the UK banking sector, I'm talking about 50, 60 years ago, the line was, I don't know whether it's true, but I've heard it many a time, is that they would stamp your personnel file. It was personnel in those days. They'll stamp your personnel file with the word filth, FILTH, and filth stood for failed in London, try Hong Kong. And then send you off to some sort of remote location. And the world has changed completely. So we've got that thing going on that that all of a sudden, it's talent. It's all about talent management. It's not about getting rid of the loose cannon that you don't want in head office.
Yeah.
In terms of the demographics, most young people, certainly in Europe, coming out of university, if you ask them, do you want to work abroad at some point in your career, you probably get about 80 or 90% saying yes.
Here, I think it's around 60, 70%. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so you're getting that pressure. So what you get is a lot more self-initiated moves. It's not a question. It's not a hardship anymore. The concept of a hardship allowance. You're getting people who are saying, I want to move. And even they'll go one stage further. They'll say, if I can't move, I want to go and work in wherever, Australia. If I can't go and work in Australia, you know what? I'll get a job with somebody else who will take me to Australia. And they're putting their jobs before. So they're talking about they're putting their country experiences before their jobs.
We see that here as well.
We're seeing that a lot.
We're seeing that here as well, where engineers, a lot of engineers, people with technical expertise, their visa might expire or their opportunity might evaporate here, and then they leave the company and they go work for another company just to stay, right? And it's actually, we've seen quite a bit more relocation payback agreements and things like that to protect companies' investments.
Yeah.
Because they bring you over, but they don't want to lose you once they bring you over. They want to be able to bring you back with your skill sets on that rotation and continue to enrich the organization back at the home office or on your next assignment. So it's interesting. Are you seeing anything about young? Because over here's what we're seeing, right? And especially from a moving standpoint, I'm great with demographics because we get very intimate with our customers over here. So we're seeing smaller, we're seeing younger people. Yeah. We're seeing we're seeing people that are clamoring to cities. over rural areas. Although there are rural pockets that are developing, epicenters, where they're not rural. I shouldn't say rural, but not the San Franciscos, not the New Yorks, but maybe the Denver's becoming a hub. Seattle's been a hub. Austin's a hub. You're seeing cities like Detroit or things Pittsburgh reinvent themselves. Become these little hubs. But people generally want to stay within, move to cities. Is what I'm seeing. And we're seeing smaller shipments. We're seeing smaller. They have less stuff now. I'm not sure if this is a global trend or a U.S. trend. I'm not sure if we just had more stuff than we were supposed to have, and everybody had the same amount.
That less stuff thing, and for the guys in the moving industry, that is a real issue. That there are companies I know who are saying, well, if you're going on assignment, the first thing you should do is sell your furniture, on eBay or Craigslist or something. Because it was only from IKEA in the first place, and when you get to the new location, go and get some more furniture. Whereas generations before had, grandma's dresser or grandma's closet or something, which was a family heirloom that they were going to keep and ship around the world if they moved or put in storage. These days, furniture is disposable. The other thing, of course, is that these days, if you go back to when I started work, 1,000 years ago, people had libraries of books, they had record players, they had stereo systems, they had, lots of records themselves, video cassettes, all that sort of bulky stuff. All of that these days is probably on their phone.
You're right. I mean, even I'm 37. I'm not that old, but I'm old enough to remember you go into somebody's house and they'd have racks of DVDs, CDs, all of their media collections on display, proudly on display. There were whole racks that you would just store your, CDs, DVDs, whatever in. I had no idea about records, but I assume same situation. And all that's gone. What about bookcases, right?
Yeah.
My wife are both readers. We have tons of books, but I imagine my kids are never going to own a bookcase.
Yeah, I must admit, I'm an avid reader, but I read everything on my, on my tablet or Kindle or something.
Right.
And, if you can carry 1,000 books for the same weight as no books,
mm-hmm. Yeah,
1,000 books,
right?
Which is a bad news if you're a shipper.
I do worry though with these policies, and I've heard about these policies coming up more for overseas, where it's like, hey, we'll give you a furniture allowance. You can either move your stuff, or we'll give you $6,000 to buy new stuff. And I worry that we're creating a lot of garbage with our disposable furniture, right? We're like, oh, it's IKEA. It's a, $200 table, or it's a $400 bed, or it's not that expensive. And I mean, I've moved 12 times in the last 14 years, and I've had a fair amount of IKEA, and it's actually held up mostly. But I worry that, that stuff ends up in landfills, that furniture, a lot of it. People just put it on the curb. And how much furniture can we throw away? I mean, is this a trend, or is this here to stay?
Well, I think you're touching on another trend, the whole question of sustainability and where we go. Hey, that's good.
Got a great producer.
I'm impressed. Because there's sustainability in lots of different ways. I mean, there's that sustainability. The other sustainability issue that I think may, at the end of the day, impact us in mobility is this whole question of carbon footprints. Because at the moment, what we're seeing is less traditional assignments and more short-term travel and short-term assignments and business trips, etc. But maybe companies are going to start saying, well, actually, we're not sure we want you to leave your airport and fly to another airport and pollute the planet in this way. Can't you do more by, like we are now, by video conferencing, by working remotely? I know you talked about people moving into cities, but I actually think that we might see a different trend, which I call delocation, which is where you're getting people moving out of the cities and saying, you know what, I can work from home in some, rural area. Right. Because I've got the broadband connection. I don't need to be physically at the meeting. And that, of course, would have a major impact on not just the mobility industry, but on the business travel industry.
Yeah, I could see, somebody talked to me about relocating to San Francisco recently, and I was like, the traffic, and I just saw an article come out about the traffic being an hour and a half, 2 hours commutes. And growing up outside of New York City, I know my mother commuted an hour and a half. She would drive to the train station, take the train into Grand Central. From Grand Central, she'd take the subway downtown, and then she'd walk 3 blocks to Wall Street area, right? And I know people take ferries and all sorts of things, right? So basically, no matter where you live in the suburbs of New York, it's an hour and a half to get into to work in Lower Manhattan. But if you're right, if you only have to go into the city, say, for a meeting once a week or every couple weeks or something like that, and you could live 2 hours away even and lower your cost of living, cut it in half, and have good schools and I mean, just avoid some of the taxes and things like that. I see that as being very viable,
Well, I think when I started FEM, which was a small little business at the beginning, I wanted to employ a sales guy. Mm-hmm. And I found a guy through an online sort of jobs boardy type site. And he was living in rural France. He decided he wanted to go and live the good life in rural France. I never met him for 6 months after he started working for me physically. Wow. He was just there working from his back room in a little rural town in southern France. He made all the phone calls. He did all the, all the sort of selling and driving up membership for FEM. And why did I need to meet him?
You bring up a great point too. And then I think about going to live in the Caribbean, let's say, right? So say I'm a salesperson, right? And my job is to email people. I mean, 80% of my job is to write emails, let's be honest, right? And then I host this funny little show, right? I can do all this sitting in Aruba somewhere, and taking my US salary and living over there and then flying in for conferences or whatever. I mean, that sounds incredibly attractive, right?
Yeah.
We're
going to see more of it. We mentioned demographics earlier, but I think another thing I wanted to just touch on when we're talking about demographics and how it impacts today's generation of employees compared to previous generations is their expectations are a lot higher than we have now. And I think
what do you mean by that example?
They expect what I'll call a consumer grade experience. And I know, from the stuff I'm doing at Benivo, it's very much in that sort of area. But let me give you an example. If you buy something on Amazon or you want to go somewhere and you're looking at TripAdvisor, the first thing you do is you read the user reviews. You want to know what people are thinking.
Right.
And I think, you can do that in our industry too. So, if you're relocating from place A to place B, you should know in advance of getting there what other people think about it, how they've settled in, how they're learning to manage their move. And I know we're doing a lot of that at Benivo, but I think that whole concept is to say, why are we treating employees traditionally in such an old-fashioned way of telling them what they might expect, rather than letting them learn for themselves from their colleagues in the same way they would do in Amazon. The example is, with Amazon, the company might put up the product information, but actually what is really relevant to most people is not the company product information. It's the information they get from reading the reviews.
Reviews, 100%. Yeah. And our employees are doing this with Glassdoor.
Yeah.
You could do this, they're doing this on locations like with TripAdvisor and other tools like this. They're looking at service providers on Yelp and Google reviews. I mean, we have to, I think, as mobility professionals, understand that, to your point about these employees are also consumers, and they've also been trained to expect a certain level of transparency and instant nature of this information. And if we're not engineering our services to be competitive on that at that standard, then we're missing the boat. And when we turn around and I'd like to hear your thoughts on the problem of lump sum, but the lump sum is proliferating in our country, in the US here. And I believe it's because the consumers of mobility services are dissatisfied with not the quality of service they receive, but the service delivery model.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, I mentioned Amazon as a concept, but let's mention another company and bring that in. Look at Netflix as an example for our industry. You know, again, you know, when we were kids, if you wanted to watch your favorite TV show, it was on at a certain time of day, and that's when you watched it.
Right. And you sat around the TV and you made your popcorn or your pizza rolls and you gathered around. Yeah.
Exactly. Now what you do,
the same time as your dad's show, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Now what you do is you binge watch.
Yeah.
You know, you say, okay, I'm going to watch 6 episodes of this show, you know, when I've got time to watch it, where I want to watch it, you know, not necessarily on my television, it can be on my device, but I will watch it when I want to watch it. And also, not only that, but when I watch it on Netflix, it'll also come up and say, well, because you like this, you might like that. And it'll have other recommendations. So I'll get down a different route simply because it's been, you know, recommended to me. Now put that into mobility, okay? And should it be a case that you phone up and you have to book appointment with your DSP or your RMC to give you the advice at a time that suits them? Or should it be actually, no, I will consume the information I want regarding my move when I want to watch it, where I want to watch it, how I want to watch it. And because I watch it, you know, it might give me more information. So, for example, because it realizes that I have kids, it might give me information about schools. But the information about schools won't be there if I don't have kids. So, you know, and again, that's the sort of stuff that we're putting in. But I think that's going to be there for the industry generally. And that's where tech is really going to help mobility in the longer term, because it's going to create a consumer grade experience.
Is that powered by an algorithm or a series of if then, you know, if you have kids, then show them this, you know, if you have kids and you're moving to London, then show them this school or this, you know?
It's both. You know, if you're moving from, say, I don't know, India to New York, you know, don't expect to have a driver. You know, you might have had a driver back home in Delhi, but you're not going to have a driver in Manhattan. You know, so it will, you know, the system has got logic in it, but also the system learns from itself. And one of the things that we do is we've actually gamified it, so that every time somebody gets information, we ask them how they rated it, and we give points, so that, and points mean prizes, so that, you know, you gamify the experience, so that more and more employees learn from each other. Again,
I want to touch on that.
Crowdsourcing information.
I want to touch on that, but we got some people that have made some comments, and I want to go back to that. So don't let me forget, Brian. Okay, but we got some comments here. We got 59 people right now watching live on LinkedIn, so that's great. And so I want to just honor a couple of these folks here. Pankaj Bhatia, good morning, Brian and Ben. This is Pankaj Bhatia from India. Welcome. So we've got India, we've got UK. Mario Reyes from South Bay Moving Systems, Salinas, California. Aaron Flores, Morning All Victory, Relo, Texas. John Zilka from NRI Relocation. He writes kind of a comment / question. Demographic trends we see is the rise of more female, more renters, less household goods, more assignments. I mean, I think by assignments he means like short-term assignments versus full relocations. Are you seeing that? Not seeing that?
I think there's a very interesting question. I agree with pretty much everything that John said there. The one thing I would sort of just question is, and I throw it out as a bit of a debate, is have we passed peak global mobility? You know, because
I'd like to see you guys. Let's do a real quick poll. Can we do a poll here? The question is, I'm going to write it up here. Okay. All right. Hold on. Yes or no? Have we passed peak global mobility?
And before people vote, can I just give you both sides of the argument and just see what you guys think? Is that on the one hand, you could say global mobility is going to continue, globalization is going to continue, we're going to get more and more. On the other side of the coin, you can say, no, technology is going to get to a point where people don't need to travel for work. If they do, they're going to be business travelers. They're not going to be going on assignment. Technology is going to help them. Sustainability and carbon pressures, etc., are going to say don't move. So you can see one argument that says actually mobility has always increased, it's bound to continue. And you can see another argument that says, no, that might have been true in the first and second industrial revolutions, but in the third industrial revolution, the technology revolution, that's only going to mean people go on assignment less. They might travel more, but they might go on assignment less.
I'm going to leave this question up here. I think they're both great arguments. We've got a couple people writing in yes or no, so please leave it in the comments, yes or no. Have we passed peak global mobility volumes? I'd love for all 60 of you to weigh in on this. I think that might be a statistically valid sample size of industry experts. We'll see. I'd love to see it. Can I get 60 yes or no's here? I really, really, really would love to do this. It's the first time I've ever done anything like this, Brian. You're a provocative man, Brian.
Oh, there we go.
So let's talk about this for a second. We'll get back to Benivo because I do want to know about that. I want to go through these arguments for yes or no since we're asking people to vote here. Going into this conversation, I would have said yes. I would have said yes, we've passed peak global mobility volumes. I know that moving is down in the US. I believe that's indicative of larger trends. People are staying put. People are aging in place. People aren't taking as much stuff and maybe aren't doing a move per se. But again, that doesn't answer your question about are they moving? They just may not be moving stuff. And I don't have a finger on the pulse of the global traveler, right? The business traveler, the temporary assignment, as much as I do the full relocation. So I have to understand that's a blind spot for me. But going back to what you were saying before about it's in human nature to explore, to go out and explore new frontiers. And I think that is an impetus that will not be changed. I don't care if we're doing Star Trek and Star Wars, we're going to be going out and exploring, right? And along with that, some parts of the world are in recession. Some parts are not. Some parts are flourishing. But there's other things like populism that are constraining, fluid mobility. And as that cycle changes out and we come out of that, there could be some pent up demand to mobilize. And the world's economy has always grown over time. Therefore, as it continues to grow and mobility is necessary to growth, we will continue to see people being deployed all over. The big what if or X factor to me is what we are doing right now. And the fact that you and I are having a very lovely conversation and you are in England. And as long as, I agree to tune in at 10 a.m., we're talking, we're working, we're collaborating. But does it replace face-to-face? I don't know. Yeah.
I run a podcast series called The View from the Top.
Yep.
Where I interview senior people in the industry, many, big names that probably everybody listening knows. And I've asked them that question. I've asked pretty much every one of them that question. And I would say that about 75% say we have not passed peak global mobility, it will continue. But about 25% say actually we have passed the peak of the industry. The peak of the volumes. And I think there's a level of consensus that even if we haven't passed the peak, it has changed. And certainly the traditional assignment has gone. You've got to remember the traditional assignment was born out of that, what I call the filth generation that I referred to earlier, the people being, the worst people being sent out, or maybe it was a hardship they were being sent out because, if you want to do well in your career, you stayed in head office, you stayed near the power. And therefore you had to give somebody a hardship allowance. You had to give them tax equalization. You had to, give them a disturbance allowance, etc., because it was strange They were going to a strange place where, people just didn't go. They're being cut off. Yeah. Now, of course, it's changed. And so you've got a situation where it's your best people going, it's your talent who are going, it's development who are going. So the whole game has changed. So I think even if volumes keep up, I think the revenue volumes may fall because people are getting less for their move compared to what the rich packages they used to get.
Yeah, nowadays, going back to that idea of personnel and everything, nowadays, I don't think you could ever think of being a senior vice president of a multinational corporation without having done assignments overseas and overseeing different plants and different, marketing organizations in different countries and being familiar with them, because so much of your revenue and your operation is overseas. So it's very interesting. It's very interesting. I'm going to go really quickly here through some of the responses we've gotten here, okay? Because we've given it a little time to percolate. Please keep the no's and the yeses coming. I do want to know your thoughts on, have we passed peak mobility volumes? Let's see here. Lori Murphy, yes, we have peaked. Janet Turner, yes, we have peaked. Paula Kupka, yes, we have passed peak due to technology. Michael Cadden, what is yes or no? And then the answer is yes. Yes, we have peaked. Past peak mobility. Jamie Massler, yes, the pandemic may affect global assignments also. This pandemic, saying. Great point, Jamie. Let's see here. Manu says, no, we haven't. Even if technology allows us to work remotely, I love to travel more and experience different cultures. I personally moved to 4 different locations, US and India, in the last 5 years. I would love to keep doing so in the near future. That's interesting too, because it seems to me, and I've never seen a study on this, but there's people who mobilize and there's people who don't. And I bet you that a large percentage of mobility is concentrated within a few people, not a few people, but you know what I'm saying, a smaller population that just moves a lot of times. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. But I think the younger you are, the more likely you are to want to move.
And once you've done it and broken the ice and said, oh, we moved to China, we can move to Australia, we can move to New Zealand, we can move to the States, we can move, you know what I mean? My wife's like that. I've moved her around all over the place, and now she's like, hey, when are we moving again? It's like, well, chill out. Let me get some equity in my house real quick. Martin Mayotte, no. Earlier, Brian said he's seeing organizations mobilize their workforce via mobile, remote. Is that not a function of global mobility? No, I don't think so. Martin saying, well, do we count the people that work remotely as mobile?
Well, it depends what we're looking at. If we're looking at from our point of view as global mobility professionals, then the question is, are we moving them? If they are, as I put it, delocating, they're just choosing to go and live in some rural, place, then I don't think we would get involved as professionals.
No, we wouldn't. Does global mobility become an IT function?
Yeah.
John Zilka, no, industry may make less per move, but order volume is not going away. Depends on how you define it. So I'm seeing this too, the shift to the business traveler, the shift to the temporary assignee. Maybe they bring baggage, but they don't bring all their stuff. Maybe they go into, furnished apartments, corporate apartments. They're not bringing all their stuff. And, as a mover, as a household goods mover, or removalists, as my friends across the pond say, that's disheartening to me. But I wonder if it's not cyclical. And I wonder if those numbers are somewhat depressed based on all the alternatives that are available nowadays, at least domestically moving. I do want to hear about Benivo, though. So here you are. You started FEM. You got all these phenomenal ideas, and your finger on the pulse of a lot of different trends and organizations and everything. But tell me how you've channeled that into where you are today at Benivo, and what is Benivo, and what are you doing there?
Okay, well, Benivo, I met a guy. In fact, I met him through the business school that I teach at, called Nitsan Udan, who's the CEO of Benivo. And it was his idea, really. It was to take the concept of consumer grade experience and put it into mobility or in fact, not just to mobility, but to anybody who moves. And Benivo comes from the word, or the root of the word, welcome. So, bienvenue, bienveneta, bienvenido, in lots of European languages. And our mission is we make every employee welcome. And so we're basically a welcome company. We don't put ourselves out as being a relocation company or a mobility company. We're an employee welcome company, an employee experience company. And what we try and do is answer probably the one question that every employee always wants to know the answer to. And I would argue there's probably only one question they ever want to know the answer to. And that question is, what do people like me do? People like me, if we're being moved from whatever, London to Tokyo, or New York to LA, wherever it is, if we're being moved, what we want to know is people like me working for this company at this level. So, for example, an early career starter in X, whatever major company. What are the best areas to live in? Where do people like me live? How do we tend to commute to work? Do we need a car? How do we register for healthcare locally? What should we do about insurance? How do we open a bank account? How do we get a visa? And what we've done is we crowdsourced that information, first of all from algorithms, but also actually from the company itself. So we machine learn within the company to get better and better and better information from previous generations of movers, of people who've moved, to learn what it is that people are actually doing. And we feature that in there so that the employee learns and can find out the answers. And we cover something like 10,000 locations now.
How do you source data for 10,000 locations?
Technology. I mean, companies say that, they can set up a location in maybe, 3 or 4 months. We can do it in minutes. We can set up a location because it's all technology driven. I mean, it gets better and better over time as we get more data from within the company, but we can initially set up a company, probably within 30 minutes.
How big of a sample does it require to really be effective? This is something I was talking to Andrew Bruzy last Friday about. We're talking about data and using data, right? My opinion's worth nothing, basically, but the opinion of 100 of my coworkers consolidated, right? And that's something. So how much data is statistically significant in your line of work?
Well, I mean, we have hundreds of thousands of data points, but it gets better. We start off with generic information, and it will get more and more specific. And what the algorithm does is it shows the best information that we have. So, for example, we can always get information from a generic source, because that's out there. You and I could find it just going around Googling. You can get some level of information, but then
it's about taking that information and then curating it for the employee.
Exactly. But then you can go down and get information from within the company. So what does, X company's employees actually do? And we start off by surveying the existing populations, and we'll get better and better information. And it just learns from itself. And as I said, we also gamify it. So we incent people to give us more and more information. Mm-hmm. And there's no doubt that, the information just improves. But we can always have pretty good information, even for fairly remote locations.
Yeah.
We're a tech company. That's what we do.
It's really fascinating, and frankly, I could talk to you for a long time about this. We got 77 people logged in live right now on LinkedIn Live. Alex Felstead, great discussion. Good to see Brian Friedman on there.
Hey, Alex.
Laurie Murphy, well done both. Thanks for putting this on. And then Anthony Walmsley, also from England. Oh, hello, guys. So we've got some great engagement here. We've got some great topics and things that we've discussed. I've actually got to go run to a meeting soon. Is there anything else that you want to leave the people with, Brian, or any other thoughts? It's been really, really excellent.
I just wanted to thank everybody for being on this call, and I wanted to thank you, Ben. I think what you're doing is so good for our industry, and I really tip my hat to you. I think you've created something really special here, and just keep up the good work. I love it. LOVE+RELO, it's brilliant.
Thank you so much. I really, really, really appreciate it, Brian. And it's been great having someone with your history and your background and your ideas on here as well. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And we'll go